You are now live. No one's watching yet.
Oh, hello everyone. Sorry we're about a minute behind schedule. Thomas, I don't even know what my 5 o'clock happy hour beverage is going to be. So greetings from Madeira Island, Portugal, where it is in fact 5 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Happy noon to my East Coast friends. Happy 9 a.m. to my West Coast friends. In the middle of America, you're somewhere in between. I hope you're doing great as well. We're going to talk about cool season annuals, and I use that term kind of in a qualified manner today. Because a lot of what we think of as these cool season annuals might be perennials or might be biennials that have been bred to behave like annuals. We'll go kind of crop by crop. Probably I'm going to go 30 minutes today. There's not tons to say. If you have questions about these cool season crops, for instance, Campanula, stock, Snapdragons, Dianthus, Larkspur, Digitalis, Delphinium. Feel free to send those in. There's going to be a lot of question answering today. I'm just going to tell you some things that I've learned through growing this stuff and then answer some questions. So anyway, before that, I see a lot of you are getting your plugs. I've been talking with Grow and Sell very regularly, and they're very happy with the quality that's coming out this year. So I hope you are as well. If you're posting photos of your plugs, which I understand you would because you're excited, just tag us. We would love to see what you are receiving. And we're happy to share that. We just like to share and help people understand what's going on in other places. As you're sending questions right now, tell me where you are and tell me your human name. That really helps me to have an idea. I can't always keep the human straight with the farm, with the Instagram handle, so I like to talk to humans. If you have a human name, please do share that with me. So I'm going to start this whole conversation about cool season annuals by talking about growing zones and what they mean and what they don't mean. We often talk about zone as though it means everything, and especially as the climate is very confused, it means less and less. The only reason the USDA developed the whole growing zone map, if you don't know what zone you are, you can just type in your zip code and put USDA growing zone. And even much of the rest of the world has started to use the USDA zones because it's a very useful tool when discussing plant hardiness only. Your zone only tells you how cold you're likely to get in any given winter, and then it gives you a list of plants that will survive that. That is all it tells you. It tells you nothing about your last spring frost, nothing about your first frost in the fall, nothing about your summer heat or humidity, and especially as we're getting such swings, my zone 7 might be entirely different from your zone 7, even if we're in the same area. So there's never been a better time to start keeping track of your own weather data. There's also never been an easier time to just find this information. You can, put in the name of your town and historical weather data. You can look back over the last month, 2 months, 3 months, see what your highs and lows were. I really encourage you to start looking at that because you might be able to get away with plants that you didn't know you could grow in your area. So don't be too attached to this zone concept. It is very helpful in this conversation today, however, because cool season annuals for probably half the country can be planted out in the autumn months. That's usually October, November. But some things can really be planted out anytime in winter as long as you're not getting super, super cold. Super cold, I don't know, below 20 is when I start to get concerned about plants. Usually zone 7 and warmer have the best luck with fall planting. Now if you're in a zone 5 location with a zone 5 or 6 winter and you're growing in a high tunnel, you can probably also consider planting out in the fall. Now, what are the advantages of that? The advantages are, sorry, my cocktail is being delivered. What do we have today?
It's a maple passion fruit margarita.
Well, I've never had a maple passion fruit margarita, so I totally forgot. I'm sorry. Cheers. Happy Women's Day. I know that many of our customers, if not the vast majority, are women, so here's to you. Everyone that we rely on heavily within Farmer Bailey. So many of the staff and growers at Grow and Sell are also some of our favorite women in the world. We don't celebrate Women's Day enough in the United States, but I will say, being in Europe, everyone knows it's Women's Day today, and there's flowers, downtown, people carrying flowers up and down the street to give to the women in their lives. So I think we should embrace this concept of Women's Day. So here's to you. Delicious. The maple syrup means that our belongings finally arrived here to our new home, so that's exciting. Passion fruit is local, maple syrup from Vermont, of course. Okay. I was talking about growing zones. Figure out what your zone is. Figure out if what zone you think you are is actually the weather you are more likely to experience right now. I know, everyone's seeing big swings in all directions. But start keeping your own data, because you can really use that later on. A couple other things while I'm on my soapbox. A lot of you might have heard of Cool Flowers, which is Lisa Mason Ziegler, friend of mine, good friend from ASCFG. She wrote this book a few years ago about Cool Flowers, and it really just lists crops that we're going to talk about today. They're not all in here. Might only disagree with her on one crop, that being Lisianthus. But it's a great little guide to get you going on just the whole concept of planting out things in the fall for harvesting the next year. I will say this is not a new concept. I have this book, sorry, I forget who wrote it, Principles of Floriculture. It is a 103-year-old book. Every single crop we're going to talk about today is already listed in here. The information is still the same. Look at old books. Unfortunately, starting in the late 90s, books were less about conveying information and more about selling copies. And that's when I started to see the content and the quality of the information in a lot of books really decline. So don't be afraid of an old book. If you find something from the 80s, 90s, that is certainly relevant to what you're doing today. Even these books that are 100 years old still have very valid information. So, cool season annuals can be planted out if you're in zone 7 or warmer, or you can emulate those conditions in your high tunnel. Plant them out in October. Usually 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost, but there's a lot of wiggle room in there. Your first frost. That first frost is not arriving on any schedule anymore, so you might get one frost and then still have 6 more beautiful weeks of weather. The goal is you want to be planting as your daylight is starting to decline, later into fall. If you plant something out in the middle of summer, either it's too hot for that particular plant, or the long days are going to trigger it into flowering right away. And you don't want that little plug to try to flower until it's had a chance to grow some roots. Many plants have kind of a juvenile stage and then an adult flowering stage. It's almost, pardon the comparison, it's almost like puberty for a plant. There's a point when the plant can't reproduce and a point when it can. And reproduction is what the flower is all about. So you have to give the plant what it wants in its juvenile stage for it to do what it's supposed to do in its mature stage. Many of these crops just love being cold in the winter. Some plants love being cold. Just think about that. Not everything wants to be on an 80-degree windowsill like a tomato plant. They really want some frost. They want some chilly temperatures. They want the dark days of winter. All they can do then is grow roots. The soil is a bit warmer than the air. You're not going to get a lot of top growth, but you're going to get big, strong roots. And that's really the goal. All right, we're going to dive right into talking about some crops. One other point while I'm up on this soapbox. I've got a lot to say today. I encourage you to learn each crop individually, but really learn it, what it needs, what it wants, when it's happiest. You can do that by trial and error. You can do that by Googling culture sheet. A lot of these, the breeders put out really detailed information on exactly what these crops want, at every stage of their life. The seedling stage, the plug stage, transplant stage, when they establish, and then when they flower. When you start to learn, start thinking about what makes this plant tick, what does this plant really want, as compared to how do I do this? Tell me how to do it. Because the directions only work if you have the exact conditions the plant is looking for. So start thinking like a plant, and you're going to have much better flowers. And I'm always happy to help you with that if you're a little concerned or confused. Like I said, weather is not reliable these days. We have to do the best we can, observe our own conditions, and try to base what you're doing next year on what you saw last year, and hopefully there's some continuity there. So the first crop I've been getting a lot of questions about now, because they're starting to flower, are poppies. Now, everything we sell are Icelandic poppies. You may also grow like the poppy pods. We don't sell them because that's technically opium. Those are opium poppies, and there's a bit of gray area if they're legal or not. Most of the flowering varieties do not really have opioids in them. They're not dangerous to have. But there was a while when they were considered illegal. So we don't sell those. We just sell Icelandic poppies. Now you might think we also sell Italian poppies, which is true. The colibri or the hummingbird series were bred in Italy, but they are Icelandic poppies from Iceland. So they like it cold, right? That's very much the case. You can plant them out in the fall. You can plant them all winter long even. They're one of those things that just seem to grow well whenever, sorry, I'm being attacked by dogs here. They grow well as long as you plant them in the cold part of the year. I would plant them just as soon as you can in the fall, as soon as you're sure you're getting cold weather. The first week we ever start shipping them is week 44. They take us about 9 weeks to produce, so we need 9 cooler weeks to grow them. If we try to start them in the middle of summer, they're just gonna fry. They wanna be chilly their whole life. And as soon as it starts getting hot in the spring, you'll see that they start to deteriorate. But in that glorious period, after they start flowering, you get a good 6, sometimes 8 weeks, depending on where you are, of these big, beautiful crepe paper flowers. And so we're in that stage right now. For me in Vermont, they always came on right after tulip time. I see a lot of people in Georgia, Steve and Mandy down at Three Porch Farm are posting beautiful poppies right now. So we sell hummingbird, which is the giant ones. We also sell champagne bubbles, which are the smaller but more productive. You're gonna get a lot more stems out of the champagne bubbles, but you get bigger, really exquisite stems from hummingbird. We're getting questions right now about how do you harvest them, and you read about blowtorching them or singeing them with a lighter. There's lots of a bit of mythology about them. So they have a bit of latex, kind of a cloudy sap inside the stem, and when you cut it and put it in water, it bleeds out. Well, then the flower kind of wilts because you've really taken its life force away. So you don't want to do that. So previously people said, blowtorch them, that's the thing to do. It does seal over the end and it cauterizes that wound. And then you put them in water. It's one of the, it's one of the kind of flowers that can drink through the outside of the stem. So you don't even need to worry about a fresh cut on poppies. Well, something I discovered, maybe just out of laziness, was if I pick them, you wait until that bud comes up, so you can just barely see a little bit of color in there. When they're fully open, you can still pick them, but they're probably gonna break. They're just really, really fragile. So I call that color crack. So when you start seeing that little crack of color, that's the time to pick them. Snip them off right at the ground. And then what I recommend is put them in a cardboard box in your cooler, completely dry. You don't want to just lay them on the shelf in your cooler because they'll dehydrate too much. If you put them in a closed cardboard box, they won't dehydrate too quickly, but that cut end is going to scab over a little bit. It's going to seal in that sap. Now when you're ready to use them, just stand them up in water. If they're a little floppy, you can wrap them in some newspaper and then stand them up in just clean water in your cooler overnight. And by the next morning, they're going to be perking up. They're going to be starting to open. We used to do this for farmers markets. We would harvest every day of the week. And then on Friday nights, I would bundle them, in 10 or 12 stem bunches, then stand them up in the cooler overnight. And by Saturday morning, they're all at that perfect sales stage. You can see what color they were going to be. By the end of market, a few were open. They're always just very popular for us. So keep that keep that in mind if you're having trouble, figuring out what to do with poppies. For design work, I usually would take the poppies in their own bucket to my wedding event and wait and insert them on site. They're just so fragile. If you can get them to the location in one piece, they're probably gonna, they'll last a week. But for wedding work, I usually place the centerpieces and then go through and dot those poppies in. They're delicate, they're a little fussy, they're absolutely worth it. They want it cold, so plant them late fall into winter. If you're in the very north, even now is not too late. Yeah, I think we often planted this time of year in Vermont. They're also a crop that when they arrive, they might look a little ratty. They're gonna come with some yellow leaves. So as they're putting out new growth, they kind of sacrifice the outer leaves to put that nutrition into the new leaves. So don't be worried if they're kind of yellow, even a little bit brown on arrival, perfectly normal. Get them settled in, give them a little bit of nitrogen to get that green growth happening again. And they're gonna do great for you. Next thing I'm thinking about right now, because it's time to get them in the ground, I always say Campanula needs to go in the ground by week 10. And we are in week 10 right now. I sowed some of my own since I don't have access to plugs anymore. They're looking pretty good. I must say I'm proud of them. But I want to get them in the ground this week because when the days, Campanula is very, very day length sensitive. As the days start to approach 12 hours, they're gonna make a bud. So you want to give them at least a couple weeks, if not 4 or 5 weeks, of growing time during those shorter days of the year. That's the big trick with Campanula. It needs to establish under the short days of winter time, late fall, winter, early spring, so that it has the root system to support a really big flower come usually June, July, depending on where you are. Campanula medium is the species. It is generally, the wild form is a biennial. So biennial grows all of one season, goes through a winter, and blooms the next season. Well, every now and then when you grow biennials, you'll see one that just starts flowering in its first year. And the breeders have selected those out and bred this whole series of Campanula, the Champion series and Champion Pro and Champion 2. They all behave like annuals, which is great because they flower quickly. The bad part is they will flower as soon as the days are long enough. Even if the plant is only 3 inches tall, it's going to try to flower as soon as you hit that 12-hour mark. So plant Campanula early, plant it in the fall if you're zone 7 or warmer, or if you can, kind of imitate those conditions further north, and you'll have great success. If you just leave them alone, you're gonna get, maybe a 2-foot stem. You can pinch out that first stem. It'll hurt your feelings to do it, but you can pinch it right out, and then you'll get more side shoots, 5 or 6, very usable side shoots. So it really depends on what your market is. I always tried to grow just the biggest, tallest stuff I could. That's what my market wanted, but you may have a different market. I will say my friends Dave and Hillary up in Craftsbury, Vermont at Bailey Hale Farm, the last couple years they've been planting a lot of stuff in the fall. They've been planting Campanula and Snapdragons in stock and Digitalis, so that there would technically be a zone 3. They'll drop down to -25, -30, almost every winter. But even there, in just the unheated high tunnel, they're getting enough protection from the elements that all of those crops are living just fine. They're putting some row cover on. So follow their Instagram account if you don't already. They run a really tidy operation. They stick to their plan. They know what they're doing. We were only 20 miles away, but I was always just shocked at the number of things that they would overwinter just fine in an unheated high tunnel. Pardon me. All right, let me see if there's any questions coming in. We've got Felicia. Oh yeah.
Sorry, can you say Maury Hill Farm again?
Sorry, Maury Hill Farm. Hillary's very active on Instagram. Dave Johnson and Hillary Main are good friends of ours. Hillary's actually coming to visit next week, so 2 weeks. Anyway, I recommend following their account. Okay, I'm gonna talk about stock and Snapdragons at the same time because they really want the same conditions. And they bloom around the same time. So I always just kind of think of them as a unit. In terms of spacing, well, let me back up. We didn't talk about poppy spacing. The big hummingbird poppies, give them at least 9 inches. If you can give them 12 inches, that's great. The plants get really big. And the more room you give them, I think the bigger the flowers are. Champagne bubbles, you can do 6 to 9 inches. All this information is on the website, so by all means, refer back to our growing guides on these crops. Campanula, I always did at 6-inch spacing, and I never found that I needed to do any bigger than that, or any wider than that. Stock and Snapdragons, I also plant at 6-inch spacing. You know, that Horta Nova support netting is 6 by 6, so I usually just use that as a guide for planting almost everything. The thing with Stock and Snapdragons, you can put 2 or 3 of them together in the middle of that cell. We purposely sow your plugs with 2 or 3 seeds in each one. So if you get plugs that have multiple seedlings, just leave them, just plant that all together. They'll find the soil they need. They don't mind a little competition. If anything, that makes them grow even taller. So if you think about 2 or 3 plants per 6 inches, that is 8 to 12 stems per square foot. So you can really get quite a lot of stem, or quite a lot of harvest off 1 square foot of growing space in your stock and Snapdragons. Just like the other things, they don't mind it cold, down to 20. I wouldn't worry about them at all. It's starting to get colder than that. You might want to consider covering them a little bit. Plant them out 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost. Even up until your last frost is probably fine. If you're growing in a high tunnel, you can push that even later. There again, they're just going to establish slowly over winter. Big root system. It's going to set them up for a big shot of growth in the springtime. If you live in the north, like we did in Vermont, planting around this time of year, when the days are getting longer, you're starting to gain a little more warmth. They can go right in the high tunnel, even if you're still getting some snow and pretty awful weather outside. You'll see your things starting to wake up in the tunnel now. I'm sure you have tulips peeking out of the ground. That's really a good indicator that things are getting ready to go. Another crop that is pretty tough as nails, actually, dianthus, is great planted in the fall. You can plant them in the springtime as well, with a couple caveats. So the Amazon series, you can plant it anytime, maybe not in the dead of summer if you live in the south. Amazon is just always going to get tall. Unfortunately, it only comes in a couple colors, like really hot purples, which I happen to love, but maybe not for your romantic pastel wedding. Sweet, also it comes in a wider range of colors, but I find it really needs to be planted in the fall. It wants to go through that short days into long days to achieve good stem length. When I grew the Sweet series outside in Vermont, by the time I could plant them out, in usually May into June, the days are so long that it just wants to flower. The sun is telling the plant to flower, and then I would get 8 or 10 inch stems, which is what I wanted. Also, Electron is a true biennial. The other two have been kind of bred towards behaving like annuals. Electron is a true biennial, so you need to plant that out in the fall. I'd plant that a good 8 weeks before your last frost. Give it plenty of time to establish, and then the following year you'll just get these beautiful old-fashioned clove-scented. Some of them are really double or have nice picotees on them. So don't forget about the good old-fashioned Sweet William. Electron is the one you see most often. All right, I'm going to skip around a little. So the poppies are kind of perennials in some locations. Generally, they're almost always treated as annuals. Campanula used to be a biennial. The ones we're growing now treated as annuals. Stock Snapdragons are annuals. Dianthus is mostly an annual, except for Electron, which is theoretically a biennial. So we'll talk about some other true biennials. Digitalis, foxglove. When I was a kid growing foxglove, I would always have to plant it out 1 year and wait a year or sometimes 2 years until it felt big enough to flower. Sometimes even if you've given them a plant a full year to grow, but maybe it doesn't have the best conditions, it's still kind of stunted, it doesn't have the energy to flower the next year or not to flower well. So that's a sign of a biennial. Biennials grow for one long season, they go through winter, then they flower the following spring. Well, these new ones, like Dalmatian, like Camelot, again, they've been bred towards being annuals. So if you plant them right now, they're gonna flower probably June, July for you. If you planted them back in October, they're probably gonna flower, you know, late May, early June. So there's, like I said, this all depends on your location, on your conditions. If you're growing in a tunnel, if you're growing outside. Digitalis, I love it. You can plant them 6 inches apart. That's kind of tight. If you have the space, give them 9 inches. You can stagger them if you're using these kind of annual types, like Dalmatian, like Camelot. You can plant them in a couple successions. Then oftentimes after you harvest them, you'll get some really nice side shoots. I mean, not as nice as that first stem, which can be pretty massive. Yeah, I love Digitalis. Anna Jane at Little State Flower Farm does an amazing job with Digitalis. I don't know how many thousands she grows. She grows them outside, she grows them in a tunnel, she grows them in the winter. She always has Digitalis blooming, so she's kind of the foxglove queen in my opinion. But there again, previously a biennial, now we treat it more as an annual. There are some old-fashioned types, the brown ones, the kind of the straight species. They're all still biennials, still very much worth growing. You can plant those in the summertime because they won't flower the first year. They have to go through a winter first. So we have those listed on our website, I think, as just other Digitalis. Those tend to be true biennial types. So just make sure you know what you're buying. You can plant the true biennials earlier in the season. The more annual types that are itching to flower, plant them towards the end of summer into the cool part of fall. That'll hold them back so they won't flower right away. Delphinium is another one you should consider growing. Delphinium is truly a perennial in Vermont, big rugged perennial that lasts for 5 or 6 years. They don't like a hot summer. So if you live in a hot summer area, they're probably gonna get mildew and just kind of fall apart when it gets hot. The good news is you can plant them in the fall if you live in those hot summer locations. Probably even into zone 6 winter would not be too difficult for a delphinium to get through its first year. Further north, try to maybe plant them in midsummer. Our farm was in zone 3. We would plant them any time of year, but particularly July, August for an amazing flower the next year. If you plant them this time of year, they'll still flower. So northern growers, you can plant them well into May and June. But if you're in the south and you're trying to dodge heat, put them in the fall. Enjoy those bright blue flowers in the spring, and then just go on and rip them out because they're not going to live more than one season for you. All right, I'm gonna hop over to questions for a minute. These are some of my favorites. These are some of the bulk of what these cool season annuals and perennials and biennials that people grow. There's some other minor crops that I'll get to in a minute if we have time. But I do want to answer some questions, so bear with me for a minute. Well, my good friend Linda, Aunt Willie's Flower Farm in Blunteville, Tennessee. If you don't know Linda Doan, she is one of the best people walking this planet currently. So happy Women's Day to you, Linda. She's talking about, wanted to know about her Snapdragons and temperature swings. I guess she's running the Chantilly series. She's having trouble right now because they're getting these really hot days in the 70s and then it's dropping down into the teens. And so they're thinking it's time to flower. Types like Chantilly, I believe, are bred for winter production, so they don't mind initiating bud during the short days of winter. So she's getting them starting to grow and then maybe they get cold again, freeze a little bit. The plant doesn't quite know what to do. She's wondering if she should just kind of pinch those back and let them sprout again. And that's what I would do, Linda. If you can see that there's something going wrong with a plant like a Snapdragon, especially, most Snapdragons will branch from the base and give you a second or a third flush. I would just go on and cut it back now. You're heading into full springtime now. Get rid of that winter damage, let it regrow, and I think you'll probably have a really good harvest. Annie in Gunnison, Colorado is asking about what things you can sprinkle out to cold sow. I can't say I'm the world's expert on direct sowing. I'm a little bit too much of a control freak with my flowers. I'm also a bad weeder, so if you are direct seeding, you need to know what those seedlings look like so you can get the weed seeds or get the weeds out of the way. Larkspur is a great one. Poppies, I wouldn't direct sow opium poppies. I would direct sow opium poppies. I would not direct sow the Icelandic types, partially because the seed is so expensive. The opium types, the ones you grow for the big pods, they make so much seed, you probably just save it year to year, and you can sprinkle them around. Even if you don't even try, you'll see them popping up. I know my grandmother, Ardelia, used to always have opium poppies dotted around her flower garden because they would just direct seed all the time. Bupleurum is another one that if you plant it once, you're probably going to just have it. They tend to direct seed pretty easily. I do know people direct sow bells of Ireland as well. But again, I'm sorry, I'm not the real expert on how to succeed with that. I'm pretty sure Lisa has a lot of that information in her book. If you don't have this already, it's pretty widely available now. Give it a read. All right, Melissa in upstate New York planted poppies about a month ago in an unheated hoop house. They haven't done much, and some are beginning to yellow. Does it take this long for them to start putting on top growth? It can. They need a couple weeks to get the roots out. Hopefully you gave them good water when they arrived. You gave them some nitrogen, or you have residual nitrogen in your soil. That's what's going to really trigger that fresh green growth. But if you've had a lot of snow, if you've had a lot of dark days, they're just going to sit there until they get enough light to start doing something. So as long as the center of that plant is still green, I really wouldn't worry about it. It's still alive. It's going to be okay. But this is the time of year where you'll start seeing some really rapid growth. And when they get going, you'll just turn around one day and that bed is full of lush green growth. All right. Rochelle in Pennsylvania has poppies coming in 2 weeks to plant. She's asking about frost cloth. Rochelle, you don't need frost cloth at this point in the game. You're probably starting to get some really springy temperatures right now, about a month earlier than usual in Pennsylvania. But they'll be ready to hit the ground running. So get them right in as soon as they arrive. In the future, maybe just if things are going to keep warming up sooner every spring, maybe consider bumping that a little bit earlier. Or in much of Pennsylvania, you could probably plant out in November. So in Clark County, Ohio, wants to know about getting bells of Ireland to stretch taller. So more information about water consumption. So I'm not quite sure what that means. Real tricks with bells of Ireland, they grow fast. The roots grow really fast. They have a tendency to get root bound if you don't get them in the ground. So they're one of those things. The minute they arrive, I would get them in the ground, followed by stalk. It's another one that just has a long taproot, and you need to get it in the ground fast. In terms of getting them to stretch taller, it could be a matter of water. If you plant things closer together, they tend to stretch taller. You should need a little more information about your conditions, but don't let them get root bound. Give them plenty of water. There again, some good nitrogen when they're planted. And maybe plant them a little bit closer to make them stretch a little sooner. So I didn't talk about sweet peas. We don't sell sweet pea plugs through Farmer Bailey. Ardelia Farm was our farm name in our retail business, where we do sell sweet pea seeds. So I'm happy to answer sweet pea questions. They are very much a cool season annual, kind of one of the classic ones that really doesn't want heat at all. One that people should try to grow colder than they think they should grow them. But Eliza in Connecticut is worried about fussing with their roots when you transplant them. I think that's a little bit overstated. We've transplanted 50,000 sweet peas in our time in Vermont, and they were all fine. They might take a month or two not a month, a couple weeks to settle in after you transplant. But if you grow them in a tall container, you have a really nice long root system. I always grew one sweet pea per cell, so it had its own root system. It wasn't fighting with a neighbor. You can grow two together, but don't try to tease them apart. Just leave them planted. Plant them as a unit. Any more than that, you're just going to reduce you're increasing the competition, you're increasing the stress on that plant, and you will not get any better results. So one, maybe two seedlings per cell. Plant that just as it is. Don't disturb them unless you feel like you need to, but Ideally, they can come right out of the tray and go right into the ground with minimal disturbance. So someone said they're maybe had a very cold winter. They're about to start some digitalis seed. Any advice? I would say, as long as you're growing the Camelot or Dalmatian, planting now is no problem. Go ahead and get them started. They'll still bloom this year. Okay, question about from Warrenton, Virginia. Delphinium belladonna leaves died all the way back. This person dug one up and had a single shoot. Although broken, it was still green. You think they'll make it? You think they'll bounce back? Planted out in September of 2022. So if it's still green, I think it's fine. Delphinium, one thing I didn't mention, when you harvest your delphinium, cut it all the way back to the ground, leaves and all, like leave nothing. I know it's gonna scare you, but that tells the plant, oh wait, something bad happened. I need to make more shoots. So those shoots come from underground, and that's they grow into the beautiful, big beautiful flowers. So if it's still looking green, I would not worry about it at all. I think it'll be fine. The winter is not what will kill delphinium. Summer is what will kill delphinium and mildew. So congratulations if it's still living. Just stand back and wait for it to do its thing. One of the little delphinium tip, this is mostly for the northern tier growers. If you have a plant that's in its 3rd or 4th year and you're getting so many stems, this time of year when they start sprouting up, thin them out to 4 or 5 stems. You'll get bigger but nicer quality stems. They have a tendency to put out like 20 at a time, and they're just going to compete. They're not going to have room. Some are going to fall over and snap. So you have better and stronger delphinium if you thin them. Now, if you're growing them just kind of on an annual cycle, you won't have that many stems. I would just let them produce whatever they want to produce. Jen in Aberdeen, South Dakota. That's about Amazon dianthus. Any seed starting instructions? No, I've always found them really quite easy. They want kind of a warm start. Once they germinate, move them into a cooler area. You'll get stockier plants with as much light as you can give them, but grown on the cooler side. So 45 to 65 until they're big enough to transplant. Like I mentioned earlier, Amazon blooms well when planted at any time. It really achieves good stem length, even if planted out into June. So you've got plenty of time. All right, someone in Martha's Vineyard asking, when do you plant snapdragons outside in spring without a high tunnel? I think in Martha's Vineyard, would you say it's a 7A, you could probably plant snapdragons outside in October, November without a high tunnel. You might want to have some leaves around if you're getting a cold snap, but you're so moderated by the ocean on Martha's Vineyard, I don't think you probably get, the super cold snaps as often as, you see more inland towards the middle part of the country. So I think you could plant them out in fall. Otherwise, really as soon as you can start working your soil, when you start seeing tulips and daffodils peeking up, it's fine to go in and put them out. They're fine down to 20. They do not mind a frost. Ooh. All right, I'm gonna read it, although I don't know the answer. Lynn Berry in New Jersey is talking about didiscus, or the blue lace flower. How long do they bloom into the summer? This is a finicky little thing that I've never done really well with. So I'm happy to discuss it with you. Happy to learn from you and your experience. If anyone out there has succeeded with blue lace flower or pink lace flower, the Lacey series of didiscus, this is one that I just was asked to provide often enough that we started growing them. I think you grow it a lot like you would Ammi, like you would Daucus. It's in the carrot family. It's one that you do not want to let it get root bound, so get it in the ground when it arrives. I believe you can plant in the fall in a lot of locations. I'm not sure just how frost hardy it is. But yeah, some of you have experience with didiscus. Chime in and we'll loop back around to that. Elise in Kingston, Mass. Campanula plugs are arriving this week. My plan is to put them right out under low tunnels. Will they take our 28-degree temperatures? Yes. you're doing it right. Get them right in the ground. Don't wait. This is the week. Especially if you're doing low tunnels. Don't lose any sleep about it at all. Down to 20, I wouldn't worry about it. Down to 10, consider giving a little extra production. But this time of year, you should be doing great out there. All right, so I'm in Highlands, North Carolina, asking what I consider south in terms of delphinium. I think south is where you have lots of 80s and 90s, I don't know, starting in May, June. I know that can be kind of anywhere right now. They're really only going to survive in the northern tier. So northern New England, Minnesota, North Dakota, into the Pacific Northwest. But any further south than, probably the Mason-Dixon line, honestly, is where I think delphinium are going to struggle to live more than one season. All right, we've got Ashley Lynn in East Tennessee, not far from Lindadone. Tulips are budding, but they're extremely short. They're not opening up yet, but we have low temperatures coming. I'm not a tulip expert, but yeah, if you're seeing the bud and you've got low temperatures coming, you've got to just protect them somehow. So pile leaves on them, put frost cloth on them, do whatever you can to minimize that. If the bud gets frozen, the stem is not going to be usable. The short now, they will keep stretching. It's possible that you didn't get enough chilling period on your tulips. So if you see a tulip blooming short, it means it did not get enough chilling time in the winter, which we're probably going to be seeing more and more of as our winters become less reliable. The only way around that would really be to grow them in crates, put them in the cooler where you can maintain that cold temperature all winter to make sure they get the cold period they need to achieve the height. Again, I'm not a tulip dealer. I don't know everything about tulips, but just from my own experience. So by all means, reach out to your bulb supplier and they should be able to help you figure out exactly what's going wrong. There's no magic. If you have a really cold snap coming, there's nothing magic about trying to keep something warm. Leaves, straw, any kind of mulch, row cover. These are the things that are within reason to do. One other little trick that some people do is take Christmas lights and kind of weave them around their plants. Not the new LED lights, they have to be the old incandescent lights that give off heat. Sometimes just putting that between your plants with the row cover and leaving it on overnight is just enough extra heat that can make the difference. I wish I could make it all okay for you, but those cold snaps are real. In time, you'll just get a thicker skin and you'll say, well, either they live or they don't. And that just comes with time. Another one from Rochelle says that they've got a bunch of Lisianthus coming in 2 weeks along with some poppies. Can you plant earlier than April 1st? As long as your nighttime temperatures are not dropping below 20, Lisianthus is fine to go out. Lisianthus does not mind a frost. Now, Lisa says Lisianthus is a cool flower. I just don't see the advantage of planting it out in the autumn. It doesn't mind frost, so it is a cool flower in that you can plant it early in spring. But planting it in the winter, unless you have, in the tunnel might be okay, but they're really not going to do much growing in those cold months of winter time. So just for my peace of mind, I always planted mine in the spring. By all means, try it. I love experimenting, and that's how we learn new things. You might find that that's your real key to success. By and large, Lisianthus, I recommend planting it in the spring, even if it is still frosty. Cindy in Montana says, regarding late winter, early spring plugs and fungal matters, we talked a lot about fusarium and other fungal diseases with Lisianthus. Is a product like the actinovate good for everything or just more susceptible crops like Lisianthus? Root shield in particular has been shown to be beneficial for almost all crops. They use it in bedding plant production and poinsettia production, which are growing in sterile media. They're not even touching fungi. So it's a beneficial relationship. Those bacteria grow around the root and actually help feed the plant. So they reach out into the surrounding soil and bring nutrients back to the root. So it's a really kind of a symbiotic relationship. If you have it on hand, use it. It goes bad. You have to buy fresh every year. So if you have extra, you may as well put it on everything. It certainly won't hurt, and it probably will help the root health of almost every crop. Bioworks is a manufacturer of root shields. They have a lot of information and data on their website. That's really nice people. You can reach out to them, and they'll give you a lot of stuff. Someone asked about verbascum. Does it behave like delphinium? Will it die off in the summer heat? The problem with verbascum is that it sheds its flowers. It's a really beautiful flower, but I've never known it to be a good cut flower. So I don't have I don't have a lot of information about verbascum. That was Jan Trent in Lynchburg, Virginia. I love verbascum. I wish there's some really neat colors these days. I wish it could be cut more reliably, but I only know it to be really sheddy. Someone asked about Orlea in Pennsylvania. Orlea is, I don't have a lot of experience, maybe not quite as frost hardy as Ami. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. It's another one that wants to go in the cool part of the year. Probably in the next 2 weeks, I would be planting your transplants in Pennsylvania. So you might have missed your window for this year. But if you got, so I think that was about seed. If you have seeds, try them. Maybe direct sow those, so you don't have to try to be transplanting them into the heat. You might surprise yourself. All right. I think that's a good overview of what you can do with cool season planting. When to order these things is a good thing to talk about. Traditionally, we've said that July 1st is when we start selling our plugs for fall shipping. That's when we have all the information about the new varieties, we get our new pricing. But a lot of you are not very patient, so we actually have extended our ship dates all the way through the end of the year. If you're worried about missing out or forgetting to order, you can actually go on and order into the end of December now. We'll have more availability as summer comes along. Usually around the 1st of July is when we'll have information about new varieties we're trying to get our hands on. That's when we'll have anything grown from cuttings, so updated Scoop Scabiosa and Veronica and these kinds of things. But stock Snapdragons, kind of these standard fall planted crops, you can go on and order those now. Those ship dates have been extended. One other thing I forgot to mention earlier, so we're getting into busy shipping season. Some of you, I'm sure, have your plugs already. Others are getting them soon. If they arrive and you see some damage, just have your camera ready. I know you have a camera if you're watching Instagram right now. You go on and take a picture of the condition things arrived in. If the plants are truly dead, we'll make it right. We'll either try to ship you new ones, we'll credit you. Grow and Sell they really go above and beyond to try to help people. Let me back up. The first step is to take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. Part of farming is just rolling with the punches, because there are a lot of punches in farming. So it's going to be okay. We have your back. Grow and Sell has your back. If something just popped out of its plug tray, well, the plant is not dead. It just needs to go back in the soil. So have some trays ready. Have some 50s and 72s. Go on and bump them up into a bigger tray. Or, if you're ready, go on and put them in the ground. I was never quite that ready, but there's no harm in planting it if it has popped out of its tray. Now, something like stock or Snapdragons, if they've actually snapped, they're not going to recover, and we're going to give you a credit on those, because they, if it snaps at that stage, that's just too much stress for it to overcome. Something like Lisianthus or Poppies that are more rosette-shaped, Digitalis, Delphinium, the growing point is actually down in the middle of the plug, so it's going to be fine. You might see a broken leaf. Well, it's going to be fine. If you're confused about what to do, the website has a lot of information on how to file a claim. We're going to want photos, within a day or two of your plants arriving. We can't really honor claims months later because we don't know how those plugs have been handled in that meantime. I want to know how many plants were killed or were, badly damaged. That's really about it. We'll go back and forth. Jen at Grow and Sell is great to work with. She'll help you with the process. But by all means, read that information. There's a blog post and just kind of a place you can click if you have some kind of quality issue. We will make it right for you. Yeah, also count how many how many are damaged. That helps us, so you don't have to go back and do it later. I think that's about it, unless, see if any more questions have shown up here. All right, y'all. Once again, if you have questions in general, email us at info@FarmerBailey. We're always available to help you figure out what to do with your plugs. And once again, happy Women's Day. All right, take care.